Good morning, everybody. To begin, could you please join me in Gassho? Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Today, because of the schedule for the rest of the day, we are doing things a little bit differently. We will begin with the English Dharma talk by Dr. Haneda, and then we'll have the service in between, and then at that time, after the service, Oshoko, the English-speaking people can go leave after doing Oshoko, and then the Japanese language people can stay, and we'll have a Japanese Dharma talk at that time. So it's a little different, kind of like what we were doing over the summer, except backwards. We used to have the Japanese first and such. But today, for our Eitaikyo service, the Eitaikyo is the perpetual memorial service, or actually, it's trying to ensure that we keep the sutras available for everybody in perpetuity, to try to keep it going on. So, you know, like a lot of times with the Eitaikyo, they think of the donations right away, but then yes, the donations are there to help keep the teachings available. But it's also a time to reflect upon ourselves, what we've received from the Buddha Dharma, and how important it is to keep the Buddha Dharma going and available for all others as well. And for this service, we're very fortunate to have with us Dr. Nobuo Haneda as our guest speaker. Dr. Haneda is currently the head of the Maida Center in Berkeley. We're also very fortunate to have with him as his chauffeur, Mrs. Haneda, who is here to joining us this morning as well. But Dr. Haneda is really, you know, a very interesting individual with an interesting life. You know, a lot of things are kind of perplexing at times, you know, like, number one, anybody that's a Russian literature major in college is kind of different for me. And then after that, you know, he got into studying Buddhism, then came to the United States to study Buddhism. I mean, you know, from Japan to the United States. And, you know, Dr. Haneda is, you know, has a lot of varied interests. He was talking to us about gardening this morning. He also knows a lot about soba because he comes from an area of Japan that's famous for their soba. So their buckwheat noodles and such. But, you know, Dr. Haneda has a very varied background, and, you know, he's taught at the Institute of Buddhist Studies, other institutions throughout the United States. He just recently got back from a lecturing tour in Japan. So coming from Japan to the United States to study Buddhism and then being invited back to Japan, that's impressive too. So without any further ado, for this Eitaikyo service, we'd like to have you please give Dr. Haneda your attention. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Sensei, thank you for introducing me. It's a tremendous honor for me to be invited here as a speaker for your Eitaikyo service. I've been to this temple many times, and first time I was invited here was like 25 years ago, and Reverend Tsumura was the Rinban at that time. And since then, you know, Rinban, Inoue, Rinban, Ohata, Reverend Ken, you know, invited me here. And I have so many friends here, and I have so many wonderful memories about this temple. But before I get into my main talk, I want to talk about one episode I've experienced. Some time ago, in a Buddhist conference, I met a gentleman, and this gentleman told me, Dr. Haneda, I attended your seminar held at the Stockton Buddhist Temple several years ago. And I remembered this seminar. I talked about Amida Buddha, very important topic in that seminar. So I asked this gentleman, do you remember something I said in that seminar? And this gentleman answered, Dr. Haneda, of course I remember something you said in the seminar. it's always not nice to meet a good listener, so I asked him, then what do you remember? What did I say? Then he said, Dr. Haneda, you told us that BCA stands for Barbecue Chickens of America. You told us that Fujinkai and barbecue chickens are supporting the BCA. Then I asked him, do you remember something else I said? He said, no, that's the only thing I remember. So you see, it's not easy to be an impressive speaker, okay? So this morning I want you to remember something else I say, okay? Okay. This morning, I want to talk about how our Buddhist teachers, such as Shinran Shonin, read Buddhist scriptures. In our study of Buddhism, we often read Buddhist texts, and when we read Buddhist books, it's quite important to know that there are two ways of reading them. The first way is a general and objective way of reading, and the second way is a subjective and experiential way of reading. Our Buddhist teachers read Buddhist scriptures in the second way, in the subjective and experiential way. I believe the second way is an authentic Buddhist way of reading text. So this morning, I want to say that we must learn from our teachers this authentic way of reading Buddhist texts. When we start to study Buddhism, we initially read text in the first way, in a general and objective way, and we try to get information and try to learn about ideas and concepts. In the initial stage, we do not read the texts for the sake of examining the self. But as we advance on the Buddhist path, we realize that Buddhism is nothing but self-examination. Then we start to read the texts for examining the self, for knowing the self. We start to read the text not only for gaining information, but also for understanding the self. Since our Buddhist teachers often read texts in their unique ways, in unorthodox ways, scholars have criticized them. The scholars said that our teachers were reading text in an arbitrary way. Were the scholars justified? Were the scholars justified in their criticism of our teachers? The answer is yes and no. The criticizers of our teachers were reading Buddhist texts in the first way, in a general and objective way, in an academic way. They were interested in knowing the standard meaning of the text. If their way is considered the right way of reading text, then we must say that our teachers were wrong in their way of reading Buddhist texts, because they are not necessarily interested in understanding the so-called standard meaning of the text. But it is important to know that our teachers were not interested in general